Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. I'm really excited for this episode of the podcast. I'm talking with Taylor Harkness, who is currently based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting Taylor back for a birthday event for Karen Christensen, who's also been on the podcast. And I didn't really know who Taylor was. I just was warmed by his smile and his like, oh no, we don't need to shake hands, let's just hug kind of vibe. And then he kind of continually came up in conversations that I had with other yoga teachers and stuff like that. And then I was looking for guests for the podcast and he came back into the forefront of my mind and I was like, yes, he would be awesome. And so huge gratitude to Taylor for saying yes to come on the podcast. This episode was super fun to record. We talked about so many different things, the evolution of his career and everything that he's learned from being a teacher to managing a yoga studio to running retreats to the importance of authenticity on social media and so much more. So I won't spoil anything else. And without further ado, here's Taylor. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today, Taylor. It's super cool to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And you're joining me from Atlanta.
Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah. My former hometown, no longer my hometown. Or I guess it was never my hometown, but.
You were here for how long?
I was there for 9 months.
Nice. You got to see hopefully the best parts of it.
Yeah, definitely. I loved Atlanta, so I feel good about it. I left loving it, outside of the traffic, of course.
Yeah, that's probably not the best part of it. That's the worst part of it. But Atlanta's got a lot of good stuff to offer. So
definitely, it's a pretty cool city, and it's got an amazing yoga scene, which I was pretty happy about.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, and so I'd love to start with just talking about how you first got into yoga.
Okay, all right. So I first got into yoga. I was working as a paramedic and going to school full time. So my undergrad was in psychology at University of Central Florida, UCF. Go Knights! So I was working full time and going to school full time, and I never really had the full college experience. I didn't live on campus. I moved out when I was pretty young, put myself through school the whole time, and I really liked EMS. I liked what I was studying. My undergrad was in psychology, but first I went through, EMT school, then paramedic school, and was working. And, I had this long time goal, even as a kid, to be a doctor. And this was something that was supposed to set me apart. Grades and 4.0s and all that stuff are a dime a dozen when you're applying to medical school, especially the ones that you really want to get into. So this is a way to get some hands-on experience, some patient experience. And I loved it for the most part. I had a really fantastic, brief career. Since 2008, I've been a paramedic and a registered licensed EMT. But I stopped around 2013. So 5.5 years I was practicing and I got to see a lot of really amazing stuff that, grows you up. And I also got to see some not so great stuff. And I got moved to a very, very busy truck that ran all night so that I could go to school during the day. And that was life for pretty much all of undergrad was, running all night in an area that was very riddled with crime and drug abuse and child abuse. And it was very impoverished. So this was an area where, people at nighttime, often the things that they would turn to entertain themselves were drugs and alcohol. And so we ran a lot of assaults and a lot of stabbings, a lot of gunshot wounds, and just a lot of really just people beating each other up for no other reason than this is what we do on a Friday night. We get drunk and beat each other up. So luckily, I was a rock climber at the time as well in very, very flat Florida. Not a whole lot to climb there. So I was climbing at a gym that the whole reason that I even got into rock climbing was because I was a paramedic and one of the nurses in the emergency room was like, oh, you should try this sometime. I go, 3 or 4 times a week. Let's go together. So she took me to this gym and I started climbing, and that was really my physical routine and my outlet. And then it got to be where we were climbing so much that, indoors the routes only changed so often. And so we're kind of getting bored with climbing after a couple of years into it. And she said, what if we go try a yoga class? And I thought yoga was just like stretching. I said, sure. I mean, I could take a break. I've been burning the candle at both ends. I can go and sit in a room with a bunch of old ladies and hum to myself. And so went and had my ass actually like handed to me in a sweaty, floppy mess towards the end. Was just like, here you go. Here's your butt that you walked in with. It's no longer attached, because this teacher was just, I mean, she was, from start to finish, the most intense yet positive, but just very physically intense, sequencing and long sequences. And she was going to make you sweat and she was going to make you work no matter what. And I was not expecting that. I had no idea. But there was also this weird feeling of, I liked it. It wasn't just like it didn't just kick my butt in a way that made me want to leave and never come back. It kicked my butt in a way that the next day I was like, I want to go try that again, because I'm sore in all the right spots and it feels good. And so I traded out 1 day a week of rock climbing for yoga and built my own little practice until it was 2 days a week and 3 days a week. And eventually, almost every day with the same teacher. She was, very, very physically demanding, and I liked that. At that moment in my life, that's what I was looking for. And at the same time, I was getting this bodily awareness that I don't think I ever really had. I joke that, I've always had really flat feet and I have a lazy eye. So growing up, I was not the most stereotypically athletic kind of person, and yoga was the first time that I felt athletic, that I felt like I was capable and that I felt that I was strong, and that, in my own body, I was confident, because I couldn't catch a ball because I couldn't see it coming at me, but I could naturally, move into some of the deeper flexibility and ranges of motion and the strength that you have in yoga that came from my body type, that came naturally. And that was, I think, what saved me from, being a total wreck on the ambulance. It was just going to school full time, working full time. And then yoga was like, hey buddy, check in and take care of yourself. And I did. So.
Yeah, I love that story. And it's something I can relate to too. I'm left-handed. And so I feel like they often teach sports for right-handed people. And because it's a right-handed world, it's I can do things both ways. So I also can't catch a ball, but it's because I'm I don't know which hand to use a mitt with. I don't know. And then yeah, and then it just whacks me in the face. So it's just not good. So I can definitely relate to that experience, something that brings you into your body and you're whoa, I can actually do this. This is cool.
So you and I probably weren't the first ones chosen for, the athletic teams, or for kickball, or for soccer, or for, playing catch, but we're still athletic in our own way. And yoga, was the first time that I ever felt that.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing experience to feel like you can actually do something with your physical body.
Yes. It kind of drops you. Well, I mean, if anyone's listening, obviously yogis that are listening know that it drops you into the moment. And I think that being, you can explore your mind and your brain as much as you want, but actually having that connection between the mind and the body in that moment is really, for me at least, the best way to get present. And so I think yoga, thank goodness I caught it, early on in my late teens, early 20s, but I think yoga was the first time that I ever recognized what that word even meant, presence. And that was just because of the physical. So we can't, deny. I know a lot of people hate on the physical aspects of yoga, but because it's only one of the branches. But, for a lot of us, that's what hooks us. That's what gets us into yoga, is going, hey, you're more capable than you think. And also check out this really cool thing called mindfulness.
Totally. It's you feel this good thing in your body, and then you also leave and you're I've never really felt this way in my mind either.
Yeah. Or those muscles that you didn't know you have, or, just being more aware of when you eat, actually what you feel after you eat, or after you drink coffee, or after you have, a milkshake, or just it calls to mind more awareness of what's going on. And that was the first time I'd ever realized that was even possible. You kind of just walk through blindly until you feel that, and then, it was an awakening moment. So very grateful for the fact that, I was so stressed enough that I was, it's rare that you can say I'm grateful for my stress, but I was grateful that, I was so stressed enough that I actually wanted to turn to something that woke me up, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And then in terms of going from practitioner to teacher, what was that process like for you?
Oh goodness. Okay. So while I was practicing, I was practicing with a lady named Timmy Howard out of Central Florida in Lake Mary, Florida. And she, I think she noticed that when I would show up to class, yoga for me, because that was such a new frontier, it was a new adventure for me and my body and being in the moment, I wanted to share that. So I was always the one that was bringing a friend or bringing multiple friends. And, if someone was, while we're giggling on our mats, she used to actually threaten to kick me out of class because we were giggling so much. But while we're giggling, I just had this way of saying, hey, if you fall out of a pose, try it again. Or if you don't think you can do it, try it this way. Or if you're getting frustrated, to the friends that I would bring, if you're getting frustrated because you don't feel like you can do this, try it this way. Or relax, take a breath, take a breather, drop down. And I think she saw that aspect of just during my own practice wanting to be there for other people that I was bringing to make sure they were having a good time on their mat. And she said that, that aspect of your practice is special, that you should share that and you should consider going through a teacher training, even if you don't want to teach, because I did not want to teach. Even if you don't want to teach, just do it in a way that, you'll learn more about the practice, because obviously you're hungry for this. You're hungry for this and you're a learner. So, it was after a long stint of a few rough back-to-back shifts on an ambulance, and I was always making up excuses like, no, I can't. I don't have the money, or I don't have the time, or I'm already in school. I can't do this, teacher training. And it happened to be summer, so I had a lighter class load, and it was Sunday night. I remember it really clearly. Sunday night at 2:00 in the morning, I had a really rough call, and I got back to the station and just thought, I need to do something different because I'm losing myself. I didn't really like people at that point. I was dealing with the toxicity that we, mentioned earlier, of just people not taking care of themselves and beating each other up. And I was so sick of seeing that. But I knew on the other side of it, yoga was so much fun and so special. And that was where I was giggling, and that was where I was having a good time, that I wanted to jump in more. So I actually emailed her at 2:00 in the morning on Sunday. So I guess Monday morning. And she wrote back right then and there, whatever it takes, let's do it. And that next Wednesday, so just a couple of days later, I jumped in, had a really fantastic teacher training that, was albeit, it was the most intensely physically demanding, I think, thing that I've ever put myself through, ever. And I'm, again, grateful for that, because it woke me up in a lot of different ways within my body that I can do this stuff. But now that's no longer a part of my practice. As I've kind of moved on and progressed, I no longer want the extreme physicality of it. But, she gave me a skill set that I wanted to share, and that I wanted other people to say, hey, if you've never felt athletic, if you've never felt confident about your body, there's this really cool way that I've felt it, and found this yoga thing. So I started teaching after I finished at her studio. I started teaching a couple classes, and still working full time and going to school, but that allowed me to not have to pick up so much overtime, because now I had this kind of part-time job teaching yoga, and then realized the more that I did that, the happier I was and the less stressed I was, and the more I could sleep. And so I eventually went to part-time on the ambulance and kind of full-time yogi, and then eventually just weaned myself off the ambulance altogether as more and more classes picked up, and as I could then pay the bills. It took a while, and a lot of hard work, but I was really happy that my schedule became my own schedule, and this was something I was more passionate about, was sharing what lit me up versus the stress and toxic levels of having to be behind lights and sirens all the time and late nights. And it was good. I'm really, really grateful for it. So thank you. If she's listening out there, thank you to Timmy, because she's the one that, pulled me out of it.
That's amazing. It's so cool to hear a story like that, of just really changing your life through your practice, and then being able to share that with other people as a teacher. I'd love to hear about the evolution of your career a little bit.
Okay. The evolution of my career. Let's see. So, after I got to the point where I was teaching several regular classes, from those classes you also get people that show up to your classes and they want more, whether it's workshops or whether it's just private one-on-one time. So I really put a big effort and focus early on in teaching as much as I could. I would teach a lot of free classes. I would teach a lot of karma classes. I would teach, yoga in the park. I would teach community classes for other teacher trainees. And then I would teach private yoga lessons. And I had a lot of private clients that couldn't really afford yoga lessons with other teachers, but I was brand new. So it was like, hey, throw me $20 for an hour, hour and a half. And, that for me is gas money and a sandwich. So I was happy to do that. And you learn so much in those first, your 200-hour teacher training doesn't really teach you a whole lot. I always thought that after your 200 hours, you're done, but it really just shows you kind of what questions you need to ask moving forward. So, I had a solid enough teacher training that, plus my anatomical background from being in medicine, that I knew what questions to ask and I knew what I didn't know. And so I used private clients and I used, teaching as much free yoga and yoga all over the place, whether it was, different studios or conferences or festivals anything I could get into, I would teach. And there is a balance there because for, a while it was really fun. And then I realized, okay, now you're swinging the pendulum. Just like on the ambulance, too much overtime. Now you're working yourself too hard as a yoga teacher, So I had to reel it back a little bit. But what it taught me was there are so many different bodies and so many different injuries, so many different proportions, so many different anatomical different things that one private client is completely different from another, whether mentally, whether at physically, whether at with their practice. Then you take that and apply it to larger classes. Let's say you even have 10 or 15 people in a class. Apply that same rule that if you have 15 warrior ones, you don't have 15 of the same pose. You actually have 15 different unique warrior ones. Like each person has their own, previous knee injury or proportion of the way their femur connects into their hip socket or, shoulder tensity and the way that they hold themselves. So early on, I realized you got to watch people. And you have to show up for each one of those individual people that are there in your classroom and not just throw out these, blanket statements as a yoga teacher. For a lot of people, heel to heel and warrior one works, but heel to heel doesn't always work for everybody. So at an early, point of a yoga teacher, I learned to change it up and to get people into their bodies. So that I think caught on because this was, the yoga for a long time has been very traditional, and it's been very, well, you do this because your teacher told you to do this, because their teacher told them to do that, and because their teacher told them to do that. So very, very seldomly where people actually give them permission to actually change up your stance a little bit. If it's more comfortable for you to hold yourself this way, do it that way. And if it doesn't hurt, to do it this way, then try it this way. And that caught on. And so out of those, hundreds, I would say maybe even thousands of hours of free classes that I was teaching, you're probably going to run across a studio owner. And in that studio owner, or in that class, that studio owner, if they like what you're throwing down, might come up to you after and say, hey, you want to come teach at my studio and teach a workshop about this? Well, sure. That means I've got to sit down and actually formulate a 2.5 or 3 hour workshop about this one thing. So it again dives you deeper even more so into the practice, and you got to back it up. So, all these classes turned into teaching workshops maybe at a festival or at another, if you're at a festival, and there are 2 or 3 teachers in that festival and they say, I really love what you did. Would you consider coming to teach at my studio? Then you get maybe 2 or 3 other gigs just from that one free festival that you did, and then from each of those, you get maybe 2 or 3 other gigs from teachers showing up there. So it kind of took on this life of its own of as long as you put in the work and you make it accessible and you show up for people, hopefully there's 1 or 2 people in the audience that will invite you to do something else, and then it kind of caught on, and eventually I realized that traveling and teaching and doing what, more of the intellectual, the really anatomical, the very smarter stuff behind flow so that people can then take it and bring it back into their regular practices. That was my passion. So no longer did I love teaching. I mean, I still do, but I don't love as much teaching, an hour-long flow class. I'd rather sit down with you if you can't tell I'm a talker, down with you for 2.5 or 3 hours and go over like why you feel it this way and, what's happening when you're engaging this musculature and how we can shift this over here so that you don't feel pain in this knee. Or, I love the real fine integral work that I think that is what a lot of people are seeking. And so if you can tap into that market and really give something to offer, then it turned into, studios started inviting me and social media. They'd, see something I wrote or a post that I had made about the knee or about the shoulder. And they'd say, hey, come teach this over here. And it just kind of took on a life of its own. That's kind of been the evolution.
That's really cool to hear. I think it sounds like it was like a really organic evolution. And I think that it's really interesting that you started teaching for free because it's something that is kind of like talked about when you come out of teacher training. It's like, should you take on free classes? How long should you take free classes on for? How many should you do? Like, should you be a yes man for everything? And I'm curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think when you first start teaching, teach as much as you can. But that being said, you have to teach as much as you can while maintaining your own personal practice and your passion for teaching. Doing too much of anything, you're going to burn out. So whether that means, being a paramedic or being a dentist or, teaching yoga, there is such thing as too much of a good thing. And so, trust me, on the weekends that I travel and teach 5 or 6 3-hour workshops in a weekend, I get home on Sunday night or Monday morning and the last thing I want to do is talk about yoga or think about yoga or get on my mat and practice yoga. But then I will take time off to do other things and get my passion back for another week or so and then go back to a yoga class and start practicing again. So I definitely agree that you should teach as much as you can and put yourself out there. That's how you're going to learn. But stay humble in it for sure. So, when you're teaching, admit what you don't know. I think a lot of teachers, when they first come out, they start teaching all over the place and then they feel like they have to be the expert. They have to know things. You're new to this, so let this be a learning experience for you as well. Your students have just as much to teach you as you do to teach them. So learn as much as you can, stay hungry for it, read as much as you can about yoga, watch videos, practice with more experienced teachers, but also take time for yourself to not do yoga. Take time for yourself to not even have to think about yoga. And you'll find that that's where a lot more inspiration, I think, comes. When I'm feeling like I'm burnt out on yoga, I'll read a book. Fiction is a great way to kind of reconfigure how you talk to people because there's creative language, or I'll just binge watch something on Netflix, cuddle up with the dog and just watch a bunch of shows and not even think about yoga or class descriptions or when I got to teach next and just veg out because that's where I think your creativity is born, is this place of, not being so entrenched in the minutia of it all, So if you can just teach as much as you can in a way that benefits you. So teach as much as you can in a way that you're still learning, you're still hungry, you're loving it, but not overdo it to a way that you don't want to show up. Anytime that you go, you know what, I got to go teach and I don't want to be there. That to me is a red flag. There are so many jobs that you can take on in this world where you can go, I don't want to be there. I'm just there for a paycheck. Yoga should not be one of them. So if you catch yourself going, ugh, versus yay, then have a conversation with yourself. It might be time to cut 1 or 2 or 5 classes off your schedule, but balance that out with trying to maintain the steady progress in your career of how do I better myself? How do I learn more? How do I study more? And the cool thing I think about yoga is that there's so much to learn that if you want to know more anatomy, study it for the rest of your life, you'll never be a pro. There's so much to learn. But if you want to know more about the philosophy, study it for the rest of your life. There's so much to learn, you'll never be a pro. There's board yoga, there's chair yoga, there's seniors yoga, there's, yin yoga. There's so much that just vary it up and learn as much as you can. But just maintain that passion. Once you figure out that this is too much, then back off, pump the brakes.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a culture around yoga is like you do a teacher training and then it's like, okay, I've done this teacher training. Like I should probably go teach now. And it's also, or open a yoga studio. Exactly. And it's like this reminder that there's no like should or have to.
That's a really good point. Now, I want to say that if you're teaching yoga, I want to say that if you're doing anything in life, hopefully you're passionate about what you're doing. But I think there are a lot of people that teach yoga because they used it, they go, I love yoga. God, I love yoga. It makes me feel good within my body. I love practicing yoga. But then they don't realize that there's a really big difference in loving the practice of yoga and loving teaching yoga. Those things are completely different. And so to become a yoga teacher in order to teach just to get yourself away from a corporate job or a job that you hate or a job that's, killing you, that's one avenue, sure. But, maybe yoga teaching isn't really the savior. Maybe it's not what you're actually looking for. You're just looking for an escape. So I think there are a lot of people that leave their corporate job and then they go, now I'm teaching yoga, but they have to pay their taxes. Now they're a contractor instead of an employee. They have to pay for their own insurance. They have to jump from, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I teach at this studio, but Tuesdays and Thursdays I teach at this studio. Saturdays I have private clients. Sundays and they're all over the place. So you jump from basically out of the, what is the expression? Out of the pot and into the fire, or out of the pan and into the flame, And I think that's kind of catching on as people are going, wow, I used yoga and teaching yoga because I loved the practice as a way to escape a corporate job. And now I realize 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years into this, I don't really love teaching yoga. So yeah, that's a really good point. It's just a 200-hour teacher training should just show you it's just the tip of the iceberg. Now what do you want to do with this? And let that be an organic, unforced process.
Totally. I definitely agree with that. It's so interesting. People do like a 200-hour and you feel like, oh, I've got all this knowledge, which you do if you haven't learned before, but then you really don't know very much about yoga. And there's just so much you'll never know it all, which is really, really cool. I love what you said about opening a yoga studio, because it's something that we were talking about before the recording, is sort of this idea that you become a yoga teacher and then you open a yoga studio and it's not always exactly what you think it is. Could you share your experience in sort of running a yoga studio?
Yeah. So, that's a really good point. I've had a few experiences at several studios where I've been just a teacher. I've been a teacher and a manager. I've been a manager, and there's even been an instance where I've had to step in and be a teacher, manager, owner, and float the whole schedule. So I've kind of had a little bit of the workings of all of it, and I'm really grateful for all that experience, but it definitely showed me that I never want to own my own studio. At least not right now. But as a teacher, you show up and you teach your class. And that's the beautiful part of getting to share that yoga practice that we all love. Hopefully, especially if you're listening to this as a yoga teacher in the business of yoga, you're interested in sharing, and that in and of itself is a noble, admirable, beautiful goal and an aspect of the practice. But being a yoga studio owner adds not just one layer to that, but so many layers where, now you have to hire, manage, and potentially terminate people. Now you have to be a boss. Now you have to take, if you're having a great time being the fun yoga teacher, now you have to sit down and go over taxes. Now you have to hire a consultant, to go over your paperwork, and you might have to get silent investors. And there's a whole other business side of it that just because you went through a 200-hour teacher training, which almost seems laughable at this point, because if I think back to it, while my teacher training was incredibly physical and I learned a lot about, sequencing and anatomy, I didn't really have, I think the business of yoga was whatever the minimum was for the requirement was what we got for the business of yoga. So to think now to open a yoga studio after that would be crazy. So you would have to be this fantastic yoga teacher that also really, really knows business and is ready to make this your child. In yoga studio terms, they say that you don't really even break even until about the 3rd year. It's like having a baby. So if you're opening a yoga studio, it's usually the 3rd year, depending on the area that you're in, that you even start to break even with revenue and with what's coming in versus what's going out. So you essentially cannot leave the studio. You can't go on vacation. It's like having a toddler. It takes at least 3 years before you're even able to step away and bring a manager in and be like, okay, I need a week off. Because if you do in the beginning, it's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people kind of open these yoga studios and go, this is going to be so great. I love yoga. And then get way in over their heads about what that commitment looks like, and managing a staff and managing taxes and managing retail and what kind of retail sells in your area, and then losing themselves and losing their practice and losing the essence of their teaching because now they're stressed about all this other stuff that piles on. So I'm not sure if that was really your question, but that's my thought on it is just you have to be a really good business person, or at least where I've seen, actually success is people that are really good yoga teachers that then open a studio and have someone else run the business side. Like maybe even someone who's not even a yogi. They just know the business, the inner workings, and they work as a cohesive team to like, look, I'll be the creative director. I'll handle the yoga class, but you got to get the taxes paid and the money handled and the retail and the blah, 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 blah. I don't want to mess with any of that. And I think that a lot of yoga teachers kind of prefer not to have that responsibility. No one wants to be a yoga teacher so they can also like do taxes.
Totally.
Yeah, that's why I got into it, so I could also do taxes. But that's such an essential component of you're running a small business, and you have to know those tax codes, and you have to know what it is to hire and fire and how to hold that space as the leader. And so I don't think that a 200-hour teacher training prepares you for that. In fact, it's such a small part of your training to talk about the business of yoga. I would be surprised if there is a 200-hour teacher training out there that does prepare you for it, because I would imagine it would take you at least 200 hours just to talk about the business of yoga when opening a yoga studio, So I've seen the management side. I like being a manager because I get to have my hands in both sides. I really like being a teacher, but my favorite part of it is the yoga, and I do not have the brain for all that other business stuff.
I think it's kind of like anything where, people always say that it's best to stick with what you're good at. And if you're good at being a yoga teacher, you should be doing the yoga teaching aspect of it. And maybe you're good at like the marketing and like the customer service side, but unless you're like a yoga teacher turned accountant or accountant turned yoga teacher, you probably want to hire somebody to do that other stuff for you.
Absolutely. And not being afraid to relinquish an aspect of control. Sure, it can be your ship, steer the ship, but you got to have deckhands, and you got to have people that, you got to have your aces in their places. And so sometimes with owning your own small business, you want to be the one that is in control of everything. And that's, unless, like you said, you are an accountant turned yoga teacher or an MBA that, now wants to open their own yoga studio. That's really hard to do. So, turn over some of that control and just focus on what you're really, really, really good at.
Totally. And so, as well as being a part in yoga studios, you've also run a ton of retreats. Can you talk a little bit about how you started doing that and what that's been like for you?
Yeah, that came, again, really, really organically, because one of my favorite places in the world is Costa Rica. It just has a soft spot in my heart where the first time that I showed up, I had never obviously been there before, and I was with my friend Katie, and we were on this bus driving through the jungle, and I looked at her and I said, some part of me, I don't know what it is, but some part of me feels like I'm finally home. And Costa Rica just has that everything's green and lush and the people are so nice and kind. And I've been going for several years to this little rancho kind of hostel on the beach that backs up to the jungle in the very, very, southernmost tip of Costa Rica. And about my my third year there with the owners, we have probably, I think, 16 beds total. 16 or 17 beds total. And it's just a hostel where you can come in, and it's usually for surfers or just people that are, wandering. And I said it would be nice if we could like rent this out and just have a bunch of good friends, a bunch of yogis here. And they're like, whoa, we never thought of having a retreat here, but if we block off the calendar enough in advance, and not let anyone kind of book the rooms, we could potentially have a retreat of just your people here, just yogis here. And then I said, well, where would we do yoga? And they're like, well, what if we built a yoga deck? So this little surf kind of hostel, in the middle of nowhere, Costa Rica, said, what if we build this yoga deck? And if you build it, they will come kind of thing. So they built this beautiful wooden yoga deck that overlooks the ocean. And they built it, specifically for us. So I put out there I was so scared. I'll never forget. I was so scared about posting for the first retreat. I put it all together, written it up, put it on my website, and I thought no one in their right minds is going to want to go to the middle of Costa Rica with me. It's like I said, very rural, so it takes a while to get there. It's if you've never traveled outside the country, which a lot of people haven't, then it's almost scary. It's intimidating. I thought no one's going to want to do this, but I've got to post about it, and I post about it, and within moments, there were just all these comments and these emails, and people were like, yeah, this is great. I want to go. And I've always wanted to really keep things very affordable. I don't have the money to just go on these lavish vacations. And if you look in a yoga studio, the general class, the general demographic of a yoga studio is not representative, dare I say, of the actual population of a lot of places. So, yoga is really one of those things that's very exclusive. And though it shouldn't be, it's welcoming. It's expensive, and especially retreats are expensive, and not a lot of people have the means to go on these big yoga retreats. And so this was a chance, here's this little surf hostel that's not looking for much. They just want to have fun and make this place amenable for our guests to come. And so I partnered with them, and it happened to be friends that really had the same vision of making this work. And we opened it up for registration, and it was a full week of, yoga and horseback riding and chocolate making workshops and surf lessons and waterfall hikes and all-day boating adventure. And really what I thought was the essence of when you go to these places, the culture and what you want to do and the adventures and these beautiful experiences. And I got a photographer to come in because I think it's so nice to put down your phone and not have to worry about that stuff. So I had a photographer to come in and take pictures of everyone, and it sold out. And I mean, much to my surprise, it sold out. and it was this fantastic group of people that to this day, we still talk, all of us, at least once a week in the WhatsApp group, and we'll meet up all over the world. If I'm filming, yoga classes at Yoga Glow, in Santa Monica, there have been several times where 2 or 3 or 5 of them just show up, and we just have this weekend together, just hanging out in Santa Monica when I'm not working, or Florida, or wherever, just because we created those bonds, and that's really what I wanted to do. So the retreat thing came, people had offered retreats and pitched these really expensive packages, and I just didn't know if I could fill a really expensive retreat, and that wasn't really what I wanted. My heart wasn't in that. So when this opportunity came along to work with friends, to build something together and to bring in a group of people that could normally maybe not even afford it, it was so special. And I look forward to continuing to do that. I just got back from, leading 2 more, last month, and another one coming up in October. So, that I think will hopefully be something I continue to do no matter, what I do for the rest of my life. I'll keep throwing these retreats and meeting people and building these friendships, but that's really what yoga has become for me. Is I think, I mentioned earlier that yoga is no longer physical for me. It's community, and it's just hanging out with people, and it's how can you bring the yoga into the conversation, and how can you bring the yoga into, the way that you communicate with each other and think about each other. And that's a beautiful way to experience this, is on these retreats with these magnificent people that I'm so grateful and blessed to even know, let alone to call my friends. So, it came, to relate it back, sorry I get going on these tangents, but to relate it back to the business side, I'm a big believer in doing what comes organically and putting the time and the effort and the work into it. I didn't just Google throw a yoga retreat or put on a yoga retreat. I had been going to this place for years, and finally it was just a vision, a dream, that we were sitting down at the table having breakfast, and we're like, what if we had a yoga retreat here? And we made it happen. So my experience is very unique, I think, but whatever you're doing, especially in yoga, make it authentic and let it happen, and try not to force it. Make it, put the work in and do your due diligence and earn your stripes. But it's going to happen as long as your heart's in it. And my heart was in it, and it's been the most beautiful thing, I think, every year in my life, is these retreats and getting to know these people and build these friendships.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about community too. I feel like community is such an important part of yoga. It's I feel like a lot of the things that are talked about in the philosophy of yoga is that we're kind of all connected. And then it's how can we leave our yoga mat and remember that as we're walking down the street, or as we buy our coffee in the morning, or as we're driving in crazy traffic and that sort of thing. So that's super cool.
Yoga is so much bigger than what you do on your mat. That's your preparation. That's your practice. But then you take that and apply it to the real world and off those little, 4 corners of rubber underneath you. You're absolutely right. That's been the biggest practice, I think, for me, is just learning how to be a yogi when I'm not a yogi.
Totally. I agree with that. Could you talk about some of the biggest business lessons that you've learned through running retreats over the last couple of years?
Retreat specifically, yeah. And then do you want to go more broad, just business kind of stuff? That's because now I got a bunch of ideas zipping through my head about, teaching yoga in general, but retreats.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely make it, like I said, organic, maybe go visit a couple places. And if there's a place that you go, keep in mind that not all yoga retreats have to be like on the beach in Costa Rica. I know a lot of them are right now. All right. But if your favorite place to be is like in the mountains, or at a cabin in North Carolina, because that's where you go on vacation, you've been going since you were a kid, explore throwing a little retreat and like a cabin, like let it happen organically. I think I'm going to start looking into, now that we live in Georgia, I've always lived on the coast. I've never really thought of like the mountains as my place, but we've been going to the mountains regularly. And I might, start to plan these little weekend retreats. Try a little tester weekend retreat of like, get a few of your friends, get a few people together. You can fill an Airbnb cabin, as long as it has a little deck to do some yoga, and let it start to build, let it happen organically. So absolutely, that would be my biggest tip is take people to a place that you're passionate about, because then you're going to be able to explore and share with them what lit you up about that place to begin with. I would never just blindly throw a retreat at a place I've never been before. That sounds scary to me. Actually, my blood pressure just like thinking about it. Showing up and being like, this is so great. I've never been here before, because it's not yours. It doesn't have you in it. It doesn't have your footprint. So give it yours and give it your heart, I think is probably a really big lesson. But also recently, now that I've thrown several of them, understand that you can never please everyone. You can never please everyone. I'll say it a third time. You can never please everyone. You're going to pour your heart into these things. You're going to pour your heart into your teachings and to building this experience for people. And if there's someone who just doesn't like what you're putting down, that's okay. That is okay. As long as you, accurately portrayed what it was that you guys would be doing. As long as you, made your class levels and descriptions accurate to what you actually taught. As long as you represented yourself in such a way that was true and authentic, it's not up to you to please everybody. And that one hurt me more recently when, here's this, to get really personal. In this last retreat, I taught 2 back-to-back, and, Costa Rica is this kind of place where you realize, especially after you get away from like such the Western scheduling, that while you're there, it's almost this essence of, being more laid back, not having to be so committed to go from point A to point B to point C and just keep going and going and going. There's actually this thing called downtime, which is really beautiful. So it was I've been there for, about 10 days by the time the second group arrived. And by that point, I was just like, pura vida'd out. I was just like blissed out. And so they showed up and I tried to, get them to unwind a little bit. And eventually, as it does, most of them do, but there were still 1 or 2 that couldn't let go of, but what's the schedule? What are we going to do? What's tomorrow like? Are we going to do yoga in the morning? Then we're going to have this venture, and then when's the mealtime? And they had to know by hour what was going to happen and when we were going to be in this place and what was happening next and where they should. It was almost like they couldn't let go of that preconceived notion just to drop into the moment, and it really, I think, affected their time. And, maybe I could have done, because I always put the reflections back on myself, what could I have done better to serve them? And maybe I could have done better about being like, once you get here, kick your shoes off and relax. That is the essence of this place. And preparing them months in advance, instead of sending them, I send a packing list. I send everything for them. I could have also put in there like, this is also going to be a retreat that's all about you. And if you don't want to show up for yoga, then sleep in. If you want to just read a book in a hammock instead of going on an adventure, read a book in a hammock. And so there were, again, not the vast majority, but 1 or 2 that I always personalized things. And for a couple weeks after the retreat, because they didn't have a good time, I felt miserable. I felt terrible that I had let them down, until finally some of my friends that had gone on the retreat were like, first of all, this was a fantastic, amazing adventure. We had a blast, and anyone who didn't have a good time, that's on them. So stop beating yourself up about it. But also realize, like, you can't please everyone. It's not your job to please everyone. And so I'm still kind of getting over that. My heart's still mending, that anyone could say that, they didn't have the time of their lives. But do your best. And if your best isn't good enough for some people, you got to learn to let that roll off like water on a duck. It's not your job to please everybody. Let them come with their own expectations, and hopefully they'll get lost in the moment and enjoy themselves. But that's been, it's so fresh because I just got back, but that has been a really big, hard lesson for me to learn, is that you can't please everybody. Also, one of the reasons that I can keep this retreat so affordable is because I do all the work myself. I take everyone's money, I plan everyone's adventures, I pay, the people that take us on the horseback riding, I collect all the money and then pay it out to the people that, feed us at the end, and I organize all of it. I have my hands in every little thing because I want that aspect. So, if you find that part is stressing you out or taking you away from, again, just like owning a studio, actually, bring it back to that. If you're doing too much of the planning and the orchestration and the money, and you can't just be the teacher and be what these people wanted you to be when they showed up, get someone to help you out. Tag along take a friend that can tag along and put them in charge of, like, can you please just handle the activities, collect everyone's money, handle the activities, and I'll do the teaching part. I think that moving forward is something that I will definitely be doing to kind of lighten my load a little bit. I definitely recommend having a photographer, because what I found is that if people don't have someone that they know is going to capture their moments, they spend the entire time behind their phones, and you don't want to realize at the very last day that you've lived this entire retreat behind a telephone screen. Mm-hmm. So maybe look into, I comp a photographer every year. Their stay, their food, their meals, their yoga, all they have to do is bring their equipment and shoot us, capture us, and give us, those photos at the end. And I've been blessed to, again, meet some really fantastic photographers that I will hopefully continue to work with. But that's another probably really good tip that I can think of is do your best to lighten your load. This should also be, if you're talking specifically about retreats, this should also be a way for you to get a little R&R, and to really enjoy it while you're there. You don't want to get to the very end and think, God, that blew by because I was handling all the other stuff. I didn't even get to sit and have a conversation with these people, So look for ways to lighten your load, let it come from the heart, and realize that you cannot please everybody. Those are probably my biggest 3 tips with retreats. Yeah,
that's really, really good advice. So thank you for sharing that. And some of your other business tips, just as being a yoga teacher, that come to your mind that were flying through as we were talking.
Yeah, so I think that definitely the don't please everyone thing, that can be applied to teaching yoga as well, totally. Whether you're on retreat or not. But my biggest probably tip for the business side of yoga is get a good tax person. If you're making yoga your full-time thing, get a good tax person, someone that knows the tax laws and can get you, as a contractor. And I'm speaking just from my experience living as a contractor in the United States. I didn't know that you could write off things like a certain percentage of your yoga clothes because that's a uniform. I didn't know that you could write off a certain percentage of, if you have a yoga studio or like a little room in your home, you can write that square footage off if that's all it's used for, or your home office if that's all it's used for. So get a good tax person, and I can recommend one for you if you'd like, but get a good tax person that knows the breakdown of, look, teaching yoga is a really unique position. It's a really unique contractorship. So how can I take advantage of what is right to write off, and how can I avoid getting in trouble for what is wrong to write off? And that's really helped me. I realized the first couple of years I was doing it all wrong, and I had to pay a lot of different fees and back taxes, and I just wasn't doing it right. Especially when you travel, then you've got different state taxes, so there are taxes for Ohio that are different for taxes for Oregon, that are different for taxes for Florida. So get a good tax person, someone that can sit down with you and spend time with you and go, look, if you're teaching 3 or 4 classes in a day, it's totally within your right, if you're driving from studio to class, to write off your meal. If you stop and have a sandwich, write that meal off. Keep your receipt and write that meal off. It's going to save you money in the long run. No one ever told me that, so I wasted a lot of money and then ended up having to reconfigure my business. But that probably be, as far as the business goes, just the financial side, that's really helped me. And it's take a huge, it's like a pressure release valve of, if I can turn it over and go, here are all my receipts. Here's a calculated spreadsheet of what I've spent this year just on my yoga business. Please handle it. a good CPA is worth their weight in gold. So, let's see what else. As far as the business side goes, marketing, let's talk marketing for a second. It's not essential, I don't think, to have a website if all you really want to do is teach at a studio and just maybe you have a full-time job and you want to teach a couple classes a week at a studio. Beautiful. But if you're actually looking to take the next leap and turn this into something that you can maybe make your full-time job part-time and teach more yoga, you've got to have a landing strip. You've got to have a place for people to find you. So social media, and we'll get into that in a second because that's a nightmare if you let it be, but social media, having a website, it could be the most basic thing with just a picture of yourself, what your philosophy is, and a schedule where you teach, and a way for them to get in touch with you, and oftentimes something simple like that is free. So have a website, and I've enjoyed, someone else might, but I've actually enjoyed building my own website because it gives me, another way to tinker with my own business and feel like I'm, doing the whole I'm a small business owner thing. But I did realize at one point when it got to be too much, I outsourced it to a guy that, was a friend, a neighbor, and he built me a website so that I can have a more professional looking platform. Have a platform, have a Facebook page, maybe if you love to share pictures, have an Instagram. My caveat with that, though, is that social media, I hear your giggle. With social media, you have to be very careful because it can quickly rule your life and it can very quickly suck the magic out of your yoga. So use your social media to be authentic and to present who you are, and if it lights you up and if it's yours, share it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Post the stuff that if it's you and your yoga practice, post it. If it's you eating a piece of pizza and you just want to share it, post it, and realize that sure, some people might be like, oh, what? You're eating gluten? Or, oh, is that sausage on that pizza? Or are you having a beer? But if that is who you are, go back to one of those first lessons we talked about, be authentic and do not run from that. If you eat gluten and eat sausage and drink beer with your pizza on a Friday night, I don't think anyone has the right to tell you that you're not allowed to do that and that you shouldn't also be a yoga teacher, That being said, maybe teaching yoga if your lifestyle is a little bit out of control and you're at the clubs every night and drinking too much, maybe you need to put down the shot glass and do a little bit more yoga. So there's a balance there, but please don't feel like you have to fit any kind of mold on your social media. It's your social media. There's no right or wrong to it as long as it's you. And I think that you'll find that you draw the attention and the admiration of people who are similarly minded. And I would rather practice with 3 people in a room that are similarly minded than 100 people that hate me because I eat pepperoni.
Totally. So. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. It's like, I don't know. It's something that it feels like there's these social media rules and these rights and these wrongs and these things that we should do as yoga teachers and these things that we shouldn't do. And it's like, am I practicing ahimsa if I eat an animal? And I don't know. There's so much that you can get your mind wrapped up around and worry about. And it's like, I can just be me without any of this.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. And that, your yoga practice is going to look different from anyone else's yoga practice, and you should embrace that. And whether that means you're vegan or vegetarian or you eat meat or you drink alcohol or you even smoke cigarettes, if that's you, I think that yoga kind of drives for us this intensity that we need to constantly be bettering ourselves. Always be bettering yourselves. Progress. And so if that means yoga maybe helps you eventually quit smoking, that's a beautiful thing. If yoga helps you to eat less meat or eat meat that is sustainably sourced, that is, humanely raised, that's another beautiful thing. But please don't feel like I can't post a picture of me eating a piece of pizza with my friends while I'm bowling because I might lose some followers. If you're going to lose followers, they weren't your followers to begin with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I love that. That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Is there anything else that, when you run trainings or retreats or anything that you pass on to, new yoga teachers that you encounter in your life?
Yeah. There's lots of stuff. If I think about trainings when that comes to mind, I try and work into almost every workshop that I teach that we should be doing other things besides yoga. And let me break that down for a bit before everyone freaks out. Let me put it this way. In years past, so let's say even just 10 years ago, there are more people practicing yoga now than there were 10 years ago by millions. All right. It has become a new wave, a new trend, a new thing that people love to do. It's catching on, it's catching fire, and that's great. That means A, job security, but B, that more people are hopefully awakening. But let's go back 10 years ago. With fewer people practicing, a lot of the yoga looked like tradition. A lot of the yoga, like we talked about briefly, looked like, in an Ashtanga room, let me, as the teacher, crank your foot behind your head. Or let me help you into lotus, without ever thinking like maybe your leg doesn't need to go behind your head, or maybe you're not ready for lotus. It was just people taught, and I'm painting with a broad brush here, obviously, but the more so back then than now, people taught in a way that was traditional. So if their teacher said it, wouldn't even second guess it, boom, I'm going to teach it the same way, and oftentimes to the same verbiage. Flash forward now, and we've got more people practicing, which means we have physicians practicing, kinesiologists practicing, physical therapists practicing, chiropractors and massage therapists practicing. So we have people that are bringing their intellect of the human body into the practice, which is awesome. And, we have psychologists practicing. So we're learning, the linkage at a scientific level of the linkage between mind and body. So we have all this intellect being poured now into our practice. So in years past, when injuries in yoga might have taken place, they were oftentimes misalignment injuries or injuries because our technique was wrong. Now that we have the intellect, hopefully, most of our injuries are overuse injuries. So people that all they do is practice yoga. Yoga. Well, when you stop for a second and just look at the physiology behind what we're doing in yoga, it is even in the most balanced practice I've found, it is a very anterior body strengthening kind of practice, which means that pectoralis, your chest muscle, your anterior deltoid, the front of your shoulder, definitely the front, the anterior compartment of your core, think six-pack abs, and your hips get worked. We oftentimes neglect our back bodies. So we neglect our lower back. All we really do for it is stretch in yoga. We don't do a whole lot of lower back strengthening. We definitely neglect our posterior shoulder girdle and our upper back. All we do for that, again, is like eagle arms, which is stretching, not strengthening. And so my point here, and my long-winded kind of point to this, is that we should be doing other things besides yoga to make us stronger. Yoga is really good at front body and getting flexible. And when you especially practice things like super hot yoga, then your anterior compartment of your shoulder is very strong. Posterior shoulder girdle is imbalanced. It's not as strong. Now you're super warm, super limber because it's 110 degrees in the class. You go to reach back and take king pigeon, and you wrench your shoulder and tweak it because of its imbalance, all right? And you're hypermobile in that sweaty environment. So I oftentimes say, and this is for teachers, this is the business side, this is the practitioner side, this is all of it. Please, 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 please do other stuff besides yoga. As a yoga teacher, if it's really easy for you to sit in pigeon, which a lot of us, through years of practice, pigeon has become a pose that we really, really love to just lay in and we can fall asleep in. I challenge you, go run a 5 or a 10K, and then the next day try and teach pigeon again. It will make you a better teacher. It will bring you back to like, oh, that's what it's like to have tight hips, which means now you have another avenue of accessibility to students who come into your class who have tight hips, right? Because maybe they're runners, or maybe because they sit behind a desk all day. If yoga teaching is your full-time job, I challenge you to go take a kickboxing class. Get your ass kicked in a different way so that you might go, oh, I learned a new cue for engaging my core that I never would have experienced in crescent lunge, but because I learned it in kickboxing, I can apply it to all my standing, one-legged balancing postures. I want to teach that to my students. It opens your horizons. So not only does it make your body stronger, but it also shows you how to be more accessible when you can feel those tight spots and those sore spots in your own body. And it also opens your mind to new cues and to more language and to different aspects of being a well-rounded athlete. I think the biggest mistake that you can make is just to practice yoga all the time. A really good weights are awesome for yogis because we tend to get too hypermobile. On the same hand, yoga is really good for weightlifters because it brings that balance back to those who are super tight. I would recommend kickboxing. I would recommend rowing. If you can do any kind of rowing, go out and go kayaking on a Saturday morning instead of going to yoga all the time. Go kayaking. And the next day when you feel your shoulder, explore a sequence that relieves that shoulder tightness, and that'll make you a better teacher. Go running, go skating, do other physical things that have nothing to do with yoga, and try and find the yoga in those physical things. And then when you get back to your practice, try and find those physical things in your yoga. And that's probably my biggest tip to everyone, whether you're a yoga teacher or a practitioner. Do other stuff. Do other stuff.
Yeah, I think that that's so important. I really, really love that. And I think that it comes back to what we were talking about before with like having balance. It's like if you eat pepperoni pizza and have a beer once a week or once a month, it's not a huge deal. Just live a balanced life. And it's the same thing with yoga. Like find balance within your yoga practice as well. I think too, it's interesting to think about I remember talking to somebody on the podcast who's pretty big into movement, and she uses the word yoga to get people into her classes, and then she teaches them how to move in different ways, which I kind of love. But she was talking about how we constantly push, but we don't pull. Like we do nothing that's like the pulling action in our bodies. Yet it's we push up from chaturanga, we push back to downward facing dog. We do so much pushing and no pulling.
Yes. And that's what I mean about the posterior shoulder girdle, is that's where that comes from, is yoga is a pushing exercise. I can only really think of maybe one posture, Purvottanasana, that reverse tabletop, that actually engages your upper back and your posterior shoulder girdle. And if you're not doing one reverse tabletop or reverse plank for every plank, then you're imbalanced. If you're not doing one of those for every chaturanga, you're imbalanced. And think, how often do you go to a class and the teacher's like, yeah, we're going to hold reverse tabletop for just as long as we hold all the other poses in our practice. Never.
That sounds terrible as well. It's like even when teachers are like, we're going to hold it for 10 breaths, I'm like, oh God, I hate this. Which is probably why.
That's why you probably practice flow and not hatha.
Yeah, exactly. I want to be mindful of your time, but I just have one more question for you if you are cool with that.
Of course. Yeah.
I'm curious if there's one piece of advice you could give yourself, so like Taylor back when you first started teaching yoga, that you know now that you didn't know then, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh man, that's a good one. Let me think. Let me teleport myself back in time for a second. I think I need to give myself 2 points in time, because when I first started teaching, keep in mind, I wasn't planning on teaching. I wasn't planning on this being my full-time career. So that would be my first point in time, where I would give myself a tip. And that tip would be, learn as much as you can and dive into this without any fears or concerns of your own physical body in terms of what you look like, your confidence about maybe, in years past, I've not, again, felt as athletic. So maybe starting to earlier on let that go. You don't have to have 6-pack abs to be a great yoga teacher or to really love what you do. Maybe just dive into this and learn and not be held back by your fears or your concerns of success or failure. Just let this be a process of exploration. And you're always going to have that little voice in the back of your head, but the best thing you could do is to learn to silence that. When that voice pops up and says, like, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, you're not good looking enough, you're not flexible enough, your handstand's not perfect enough, you're like all these things. Practice silencing that voice. I would have told myself way earlier on, practice silencing that and just learn. And then I think the next point is when I finally decided, okay, now I'm going to make this my career. I'm going to get off the ambulance. I'm going to do this for a living, at least for now. How am I going to make a living doing this? I think I would have reminded myself to have fun. Yeah, to have fun, because that first leap of, oh no, where's my next paycheck coming from? Oh no, how am I going to find more private clients? Oh, but I'm letting go of my health insurance because it's attached to my job. Oh no, like all those pressured sensations, they eventually, with enough time and energy, yes, they resolve themselves, but I almost lost myself in that. I lost what it was to enjoy teaching, and to have fun teaching. So just have fun with this and realize that the reason that you're becoming a yoga teacher is to get away from the stress, not to just take on stress of a different type. And granted, with every job, there's stress. So my stress now looks like I have to travel, so I have to be on a plane all the time. I have to promote myself on social media, which is something I can't stand doing. I have to, make sure that registrations for my class, even a month or 2 months ahead of time, are going well. I have to, there's this stress and there's this pressure. I have to pay my own taxes. I have to, but that is part of the job. I would much rather have that stress than have the stress that I had before. So maybe don't just blindly step into it thinking there's not going to be any stress, but realize the reason that you're becoming a yoga teacher, still talking to my former self, Taylor, is because you're trying to get away from this particular kind of stress that you recognize is killing you. It's toxic. And have fun with this. Not everyone gets to say that they're a yoga teacher. And if that's your job, have fun with this and own that and be like, yeah, I'm a yoga teacher, which means I get to, on days where I'm not teaching, I get to sleep in. I get to take my dog for a walk. I get to, rather than waking up to an alarm, I get to wake up to his big sniffy snout, licking my face, and I get to have a cup of tea and meditate in the mornings. So enjoy that rather than trying to look for the next thing, which I still have to remind myself actually to this day is, today I woke up to exactly what I just described is my dog sniffing me and licking me, and I had my tea and I got to sit and meditate and wonder what I wanted to have for breakfast. And that's I chose that. I forget sometimes that I chose that lifestyle, and I don't oftentimes think that I deserve it or that I still feel like I have to be doing something. There's something I have to be doing. I have to, and I create these lists of things that what's next? I have to fill my day, when really reminding myself, I need to remind myself that the reason you're a yoga teacher, one of the beautiful things about your schedule is that you don't have to have that kind of stress. You don't have to have that kind of go. Live in this. You chose this lifestyle, so live in this and stop trying to bring back that other stress into what is now this gorgeous piece of peace that you've built for yourself. So have fun with it.
That's beautiful. That's a good reminder for myself as well. So thank you for sharing that.
If you're a yoga teacher, and if you're out there and you're listening and you're a yoga teacher, enjoy being a yoga teacher. You built this lifestyle so that you wouldn't have to have that other stress. So just enjoy it. Enjoy those, being able to go meet up with a friend for lunch or going on a walk or, enjoy your downtime. Enjoy not having to enjoy that part of your job is that you get to go to a studio and practice. And this is technically, showing up for work. Training.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Cool. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Now I'm at home. No. People can find me TaylorHarkness.com. Taylor, common spelling, Taylor. Harkness is, I don't like to say this because I feel like I'm such a bright, positive person, but it's like darkness. So Harkness is like darkness, but with an H. Harkness. So TaylorHarkness.com. All of my schedule, my travel schedule, my upcoming stuff is on there. Retreats are up there if you'd like to join me on a retreat. They're a blast, and they're probably unlike any other retreat you've ever been on. Lots of adventures and lots of downtime. And just look for me in a city near you, maybe. Also, I teach on Yoga Glow, which is a really cool service if you've never heard of it. It's Yoga Glow without a W, so yogaglo.com. And it's yoga that you can do anywhere, no matter where you're at. So if you're traveling full time and let's say you're in a hotel for work, you can pull it up and practice with some of your favorite teachers, and you can do it from your home. And yoga teachers out there, it's a really great way to just stay inspired and to creep up on other people's sequencing and their ideas. You're welcome anytime to use whatever I put up there on Yoga Glow. Anytime.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Taylor. I really appreciate it. It was amazing to talk to you.
Thank you so much for thanking me for having me, and hopefully I'll talk to you again pretty soon.
Yeah, definitely. So I hope that everyone enjoyed the interview with Taylor as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. He's got such a light, bubbly personality and such a fun way of just making an interview not interview-like at all. It's more just a conversation between two people who have the same interests, which is something that I really, really love about being a podcast host. And as he said on the podcast, you can find more about him at taylorharkness.com. And I'll put a link to that on the show notes, which you can find at www.mbomyoga.com. And you can sign up for the newsletter, read about all the new blog posts and everything like that on the website, find out everything new and exciting. And I do have some big announcements and big changes kind of coming up in the next episode or so. So stay tuned for everything that's new for MBO. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.